The plasma cannon's final discharge echoed across the scorched battlefield of Kepler 442b, marking the end of humanity's first interstellar war. Sergeant Marcus Chun lowered his rifle, watching as the last Zephyrian cruiser limped away into the crimson sky. The silence that followed felt unnatural after 3 years of constant warfare. Marcus wiped the grime from his face, leaving streaks of clean skin beneath layers of ash and alien dust. Around him, the remnants of the 7th Human Expeditionary Force began the grim task of counting their survivors. Of the 2,000 soldiers who had landed on this world, fewer than 300 remained standing. The Zephyrians had been formidable opponents, standing nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 arms and exoskeletons that could deflect small arms fire. They had initially seemed unstoppable. Their technology was superior, their ships faster, and their weapons more advanced. But they had underestimated human adaptability and the brutal creativity that emerged when humanity's back was pressed against the wall. Marcus walked through the debris field that had once been the Zephyrian Command Center. Twisted metal and crystalline structures jutted from the ground like the bones of some massive beast. The air tasted of ozone and something that reminded him of burnt copper. His boots crunched on fragments of alien machinery, each step a small victory in itself. A movement caught his eye near the collapsed entrance of what appeared to be a bunker. Something was trapped beneath a fallen support beam, struggling weakly. Marcus approached cautiously, his rifle ready. The war might be over, but old habits died hard. What he found defied his expectations entirely. The creature was unlike any Zephyrian he had encountered. Where the warrior caste stood tall and imposing, this being was smaller, more delicate. Its skin held an opalescent quality that shifted between silver and pale blue, and instead of the typical 4 arms, it possessed 2 that ended in hands remarkably similar to human ones, though with 6 fingers instead of 5. Most striking were its eyes. Large and luminous, they held an intelligence that seemed to peer directly into Marcus's soul. There was fear there, certainly, but also something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or recognition. The creature spoke, its voice melodic, and somehow managing to convey meaning despite Marcus having never heard the language before. The universal translator embedded in his helmet remained silent, suggesting this was not a known Zephyrian dialect. Marcus holstered his weapon and knelt beside the trapped being. The support beam was heavy, but not impossibly so for someone enhanced with military augmentations. He positioned himself and heaved, muscles straining against the weight. The beam shifted, then lifted just enough for the creature to pull itself free. It immediately scrambled backward, pressing itself against the bunker wall. Its large eyes never left Marcus's face, and he could see rapid calculations taking place behind them. The creature was trying to determine if he represented salvation or simply a different form of death. Marcus raised his hands slowly, palms outward in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. The creature's head tilted, studying him with obvious fascination. When he took a step back to give it space, something remarkable happened. It spoke again, and this time somehow he understood. Not the words themselves, but the meaning behind them. Gratitude, confusion, a desperate hope that perhaps this strange alien might show mercy. The creature was clearly not a warrior. Its clothes, though torn and dirty, appeared to be made of fine materials. Intricate patterns were woven into the fabric, suggesting artistic sensibility rather than military function. Around its neck hung what appeared to be some kind of translation device, though it had been damaged in the collapse. Marcus pointed to himself. "Marcus," he said clearly. The creature's eyes widened with understanding. It touched its own chest. "Lyra," it replied, the name somehow carrying musical undertones that made it sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. A commotion behind him announced the arrival of other human soldiers. They emerged from cover positions with weapons drawn, having heard voices from the ruins. Marcus held up a hand to stop them from approaching too quickly. Lieutenant Rodriguez, his immediate superior, surveyed the scene with practiced military assessment. "Prisoner, Sergeant." Marcus looked back at Lyra, who had pressed herself even further against the wall at the sight of additional humans. Fear radiated from the creature's posture, but it made no attempt to flee or call for help. It simply waited, as if resigned to whatever fate awaited. "I think so," Marcus replied, though something about the situation felt wrong. This didn't feel like capturing an enemy combatant. It felt like rescuing a victim. Rodriguez activated his comm unit. "Command, this is Rodriguez. We have a potential intelligence asset. Unknown Zephyrian subspecies, possibly non-combatant. Requesting extraction and interrogation protocols." The response crackled through static. "Understood, Rodriguez. Secure the asset and prepare for transport. Intelligence wants a full debrief on any new Zephyrian variants. The peace talks depend on understanding their complete social structure." Lyra seemed to understand what was happening even without translation. Its shoulders slumped in resignation, but when Marcus approached with restraint cuffs, it offered its hands without resistance. The touch of its skin was surprisingly warm, and Marcus could feel a slight trembling that spoke of barely contained terror. As they prepared to move out, Marcus found himself studying Lyra more closely. The creature's clothing, behavior, and obvious intelligence suggested it was far from the warrior caste they had been fighting. Perhaps it was a scientist, or an artist, or simply a civilian who had been in the wrong place when the war came to its conclusion. The transport shuttle arrived within the hour, its engines drowning out the eerie silence of the battlefield. As they waited to board, Lyra looked back at the ruins of what had clearly been its world. Marcus followed its gaze and saw not the remains of an enemy stronghold, but something that might have been beautiful once. Gardens choked with debris, delicate spires that had reached toward the sky before human artillery had brought them down. For the first time since the war began, Marcus wondered what they had really been fighting for, and what they had truly won. The official reports would call it victory, but looking at Lyra's expression as they left its world behind, victory felt like a concept that needed re-examination. The shuttle's doors closed with mechanical finality, sealing them all inside with recycled air and the soft hum of life support systems. Lyra sat in the restraint seat across from Marcus, its large eyes now focused on some distant point beyond the small viewport. It was no longer looking at its ruined world, but at something else entirely. Something that existed only in memory, perhaps, or in hopes that had been forever altered by the day's events. Marcus found himself hoping that whatever came next, it would be better than what they were leaving behind. The interrogation facility on Luna Station buzzed with activity as the first wave of war prisoners arrived from the Kepler system. Marcus stood outside interview room 7, watching through the one-way glass as Lyra sat motionless in the standard issue restraint chair. 3 days had passed since their arrival, and the alien had barely moved except when forced to. Dr. Sarah Winters, the xenolinguistics specialist assigned to the case, approached with a tablet full of data. Her expression held the frustration of someone who had been trying to solve an impossible puzzle. "Any progress?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer from her expression. "It's unlike anything we've encountered," Sarah replied, pulling up holographic displays of brain scans and linguistic analysis. "The neural patterns are completely different from the warrior caste Zephyrians we've studied. It's almost as if we're dealing with an entirely different species that happens to share some physical characteristics." Through the glass, Lyra remained perfectly still. It had not spoken since arriving at the station, despite repeated attempts by interrogators to elicit information about Zephyrian military capabilities, hidden bases, or plans for continued resistance. The silence was not defiant, Marcus observed. It seemed more like the creature had simply withdrawn into itself, as if protecting something precious that existed only in its inner world. "The translation matrix we captured from its home world is beyond our current understanding," Sarah continued. "It's not just converting language, it's somehow facilitating actual telepathic communication. We've never seen anything like it." Colonel Harrison emerged from his office at the end of the corridor, his face bearing the particular expression of a career military officer dealing with politicians and bureaucrats. The peace negotiations were not going well, and pressure was mounting for actionable intelligence from the prisoners. "Sergeant Shun," Harrison called out. "A word." Marcus followed the colonel into his office, noting the multiple screens displaying news feeds from Earth. Public opinion was demanding answers about the war's true cost, and the discovery of what appeared to be non-combatant aliens was raising uncomfortable questions about the nature of their recent victory. The prisoner hasn't provided any useful intelligence, Harrison stated bluntly. Command is considering enhanced interrogation protocols. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Enhanced interrogation was a euphemism that covered a range of techniques that the military preferred not to discuss in official reports. He thought of Lyra's resigned acceptance when they had first captured it, the way it had offered its hands for restraint without resistance. "Sir, I don't believe the prisoner is withholding information," Marcus said carefully. "I think it genuinely doesn't know anything about military operations." Harrison's expression hardened. "That's not for us to determine, Sergeant. Our job is to extract information, not to make judgments about alien motivations." "What if I could get it to talk?" Marcus asked. "Give me some time with the prisoner. No interrogatorios, no formal protocol. Just a conversation." The colonel studied him for a long moment. "You think you have some special connection with this thing?" Marcus considered his answer carefully. "I save its life. In human culture, that creates a bond. Maybe alien psychology works similarly." Harrison was quiet for nearly a minute, weighing options that all carried significant risks. Finally, he nodded. "You have 48 hours. If you can't produce results, we proceed with enhanced methods." An hour later, Marcus entered interview room 7 carrying 2 cups of the synthetic coffee that passed for sustenance on Luna Station. Lyra looked up as he entered, those large luminous eyes tracking his movement with obvious wariness. Marcus set 1 cup on the table near Lyra and took the chair across from it. He made no attempt to speak immediately, instead simply sitting and drinking his coffee while studying the alien's reactions. Gradually, some of the tension left Lyra's posture. The creature seemed to recognize that this interaction was different from the previous interrogation sessions. Marcus was not demanding information or making threats. He was simply present, offering what might have been companionship in an otherwise hostile environment. "I know you understand more than you're letting on," Marcus said quietly. "The translation device around your neck is damaged, but not completely non-functional." Lyra's hand moved instinctively to the device, confirming Marcus's suspicion. The creature had been deliberately limiting its apparent comprehension, perhaps hoping that if it seemed unable to communicate, it might be dismissed as unimportant. "My name is Marcus Chun," he continued. "I'm a soldier, but before the war I was a teacher. I taught children about different cultures, about how people from different places could find common ground." Something flickered in Lyra's expression at the mention of teaching. The creature leaned forward slightly, its attention now fully focused on Marcus's words. "What did you teach?" Marcus asked. "Before the war came to your world, what was your purpose?" For a long moment, Lyra remained silent. Then, so quietly that Marcus almost missed it, it spoke. "Music," Lyra said, the word carrying harmonics that made it sound like a melody in itself. "I taught the young ones how to make harmony from discord." The translation device flickered and hummed, and suddenly Marcus could understand not just the words but the deeper meaning behind them. Lyra had been an educator, like himself, someone whose life had been devoted to creation rather than destruction. "The war destroyed your school?" Marcus asked gently. Lyra nodded, its eyes growing distant with memory. "The Harmony Halls. 300 young ones were learning to sing the songs of growing things. When your ships came, we thought perhaps you had come to hear our music. We had no weapons, no knowledge of fighting. We only knew how to make beautiful sounds." The weight of realization settled on Marcus like a physical burden. They had not been fighting a military installation. They had been attacking a center of learning, a place where alien children had been studying music and art. "The warrior caste came later," Lyra continued, its voice growing stronger as the translation device synchronized fully. "They came to protect us, but they did not understand your kind of warfare. They fought with honor and rules. You fought to win." Marcus felt his worldview shifting fundamentally. The enemy they had spent 3 years battling had been protectors, not aggressors. The installations they had destroyed had been schools and cultural centers, not military bases. "Why didn't your people try to communicate?" he asked. "Why didn't they tell us you were non-combatants?" Lyra's expression grew puzzled. "We tried. For many rotations, we sent harmony signals, songs of peace, and welcome. Your people responded with weapons fire. We thought perhaps your kind communicates through violence, so the warriors came to speak your language." The conversation continued for hours, with Marcus gradually learning about a civilization that was fundamentally different from anything humans had encountered. The Zephyrians were not a single species, but a collective of different races that had learned to live in harmony through literal musical communication. What humans had interpreted as military installations were actually resonance chambers where different species learned to understand each other through shared melodies. The warrior caste that had fought so fiercely were not soldiers in the human sense, but protectors who had taken up arms only when they realized that peaceful communication was failing. They had died defending not military secrets, but children and teachers and artists who represented the cultural heart of their civilization. As the session ended, Lyra looked directly into Marcus's eyes. "You are different from the others," it said. "You hear not just words, but meaning. Among my people, this makes you worthy of trust." Marcus left the interview room with his mind reeling. Everything he thought he knew about the war had been wrong. They had not been fighting a military enemy, but had stumbled into a first-contact situation with a peaceful civilization and interpreted their attempts at communication as acts of aggression. But perhaps most disturbing was the realization that the peace negotiations currently taking place on Earth were based on the assumption that they had defeated a military threat. The truth was far more complex and far more damning for humanity's first venture into interstellar relations. The question now was what to do with that truth, and whether revealing it would help or destroy any chance of genuine peace between the species. The emergency session in Colonel Harrison's office included representatives from 3 different government agencies, each with their own interpretation of what Marcus's breakthrough with Lyra meant for the ongoing peace negotiations. The holographic displays showed real-time feeds from Earth, where diplomats were still operating under the assumption that they had defeated a military aggressor. "This information cannot reach the negotiation teams," declared Agent Morrison from Interstellar Relations. "If Earth's population discovers we attacked a peaceful civilization, public support for the colonial expansion program will collapse completely." Dr. Winters looked up from her analysis of Lyra's statements. "We're talking about fundamentally rewriting our understanding of first contact protocols. This isn't just about one war, it's about how humanity approaches alien civilizations." Marcus stood near the window, watching Earth rise over Luna's horizon. The blue marble looked peaceful from this distance, but he knew that down there, billions of people were celebrating humanity's victory in its first interstellar war. They had no idea that victory had come at the cost of devastating a civilization that had been trying to welcome them. "Sergeant Chun," Harrison said, "you've established communication with the prisoner. Can it provide tactical information about remaining Zephyrian forces?" The question made Marcus's stomach turn. "Sir, there are no remaining military forces. The warrior caste died protecting civilians. What we're calling Zephyrian territory is actually a collection of peaceful colonies and cultural centers." Agent Morrison leaned forward aggressively. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that will cripple humanity's expansion into space. We can't approach every alien contact assuming they're peaceful. The warrior caste we fought was real, and they were formidable. Because we forced them to become warriors," Marcus replied. "They were teachers and protectors who had to learn combat tactics, because we interpreted their peaceful overtures as attacks." The debate continued for hours, with various officials arguing about classification levels, public relations strategies, and the long-term implications of Marcus's discoveries. Throughout it all, Lyra remained in its cell, probably unaware that its revelations were causing a crisis in human leadership. Finally, Harrison called for a recess. As the various officials filed out to make private communications with their superiors, he gestured for Marcus to remain. "Off the record, Sergeant, what do you think we should do?" Marcus had been dreading this question because he knew his answer would be unpopular. "I think we need to tell the truth. All of it. And I think we need to find a way to make amends." Harrison was quiet for a long moment. That would mean admitting that humanity's first interstellar war was based on a fundamental misunderstanding. It would call into question our entire approach to space exploration. "Maybe our approach needs to be questioned," Marcus replied. "Maybe the fact that we defaulted to military solutions instead of trying harder to establish communication says something about us that we need to address." 3 days later, Marcus received orders that he had been expecting but dreading. Lyra was being transferred to a classified research facility on Earth, where xenobiologists and military strategists would conduct more intensive studies. The official purpose was to develop better understanding of alien psychology for future encounters. But Marcus knew what that really meant. Lyra was too valuable as a source of information to be treated as a simple prisoner of war. It would spend the rest of its existence as a test subject, isolated from its own kind, and studied like a laboratory specimen. That evening, Marcus returned to interview room 7 for what he assumed would be his final conversation with Lyra. The alien looked up as he entered, and somehow Marcus could tell that it understood what was coming. "They are moving me," Lyra said without preamble. "I can hear the harmony of decision in the air." The song has changed from uncertainty to resolution. Marcus sat down heavily. "I'm sorry. I try to explain that you're not a military asset, but they see potential intelligence value in studying your people's communication methods." Lyra's expression remained calm, but Marcus could see resignation in its luminous eyes. "Among my people, there's a concept that does not translate well to your language. It means something like the choice to sing alone rather than be forced to make discord." The implication was clear. Lyra was considering ending its own life rather than becoming a permanent test subject. Marcus felt a surge of protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. "There might be another way," he said, though he wasn't sure what that way might be. Lyra tilted its head curiously. "Your mind holds the harmony of genuine concern. This is unusual among your kind, for what I have observed." "Not all humans are the same," Marcus replied. "Just like not all Zephyrians are warriors, not all humans are conquerors."